How's everybody?
Good.
I have to be honest with you, after this week, I'm starting to believe in man-made global warming, or somebody's doing it, because it's awfully hot. But we're glad that we're able to be here tonight in this cool building and can assemble to watch these kids. You know, when you get to sit down front and watch their faces when they're singing these songs, it does your heart good. And if you've never had that chance, you might ought to give it a try sometime. It's really an experience. I have a number of names I want to mention before we start our class tonight. By the way, we'll be studying in Acts 16 if you want to be turning there. We have some who among us who are either hospitalized or sick or needing our prayers. Sister Early continues in the hospital, and they're planning to move her to a rehab facility when she's able to make it. I'm not sure what all they're having to work out, but all the details haven't yet been put in order, so they're still trying to get her to that position. Sister Betty has gone home from rehab, and so she's available if you'd like to go and visit with her. Also, Terry Early had to go to the ER Sunday and running a fever, some type of infection, I don't know, but she's some better, but still at home recovering. And we'll remember her in our prayers. Elijah Ware, last I spoke about an hour ago with his grandmother, he was in the ER here in Rica. I don't know exactly what's ailing him, but I understand he's going through some difficulty, and they're asking that we remember Brother Elijah in our prayers tonight. Also, Thomasina is having some difficulty still with her closing on her house. She said, I will not be able to be there tonight because I'm having to deal with some of the logistics. And so she's asking us to pray for her. Also, Ann and Stan McGuire are at home not feeling well, and they're asking to remember them. Anyone else we need to mention on our prayer list? I didn't get an exhaustive list necessarily, but I want to mention a few and ask you to pray for these. My inmates were asking me about VBS and what was going on, and do we have a class for everybody? I said, yeah, we have classes even for adults. And what are the topics? And I told them yesterday my father will be teaching about the Ethiopian eunuch, because one of my inmates was asking me or discussing with me Acts 8. He brought it up. It was kind of interesting because he was discussing that very episode with me. And so I said, well, that's interesting. My father will be teaching that, which was last night, about Acts 8 and the Ethiopian eunuch. And they said, are you going to teach? I said, yes, I'll be teaching tomorrow night. And what is your topic? I'll be talking about the Philippian jailer. And they all laughed. And I said, what's so funny about that? Well, we know why they assigned you that topic. I said, well, I don't think it has anything to do with my work here with the county, but I think it just happened to fall that way. In fact, I was supposed to speak Sunday night, and Herman stole my spot. And so he said, I'll have to wait until I'm dead tired and teach this class tonight. So we're in Acts 16. If you want to begin with me, I guess it's around verse 6. Before we get there, kind of make mention of the fact that in chapter 15 of Acts, there had been that meeting, that council, as we sometimes call it, where the question of Gentiles' inclusion in the fellowship of the church was under consideration, and particularly whether or not there ought to be a requirement to have them circumcised. This was a very difficult thing for Jewish Christians to get their mind around. They were so accustomed and so trained in their thought process to view uncircumcised individuals as even less than human in some cases, that to accept them in full fellowship in the church seemed just more than they could swallow. So there was obviously a lot of tension on that question. The entire book of Galatians, by the way, deals with that question. A lot of it in Romans and 2 Corinthians as well deals with some of those topics. It was a widespread issue. But there was a decree, or a letter, should I say, that was written as a result of that meeting. An epistle, probably, no doubt to say, rightly the first epistle ever written by the apostles and by the elders, and in agreement with the whole church at Jerusalem. And they dispatched Paul and Silas that we're going to send Paul and John Mark. Barnabas wanted to take John Mark and go in this particular mission, but Paul and Barnabas didn't see eye to eye about that, and so they had a falling out. And so Paul took Silas and delivered those decrees that letter that was written and carried it to the churches they'd already worked with. But now in verse 6, he's now turning his attention to new fields of labor. And so the text says that when they had gone through Phrygia and the region of Galatia, they were forbidden by the Holy Spirit to preach the word in Asia. After they had come to Mysia, they tried to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit did not permit them. So passing by Mysia, they came down to Troas, and a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia stood and pleaded with him, saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." Now after he had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go to Macedonia, concluding that the Lord had called us to preach the gospel to them. Now, I want to make an observation or two about this. When Paul was on his missionary endeavors, he had his own philosophy, his own ideas, his own agenda about how these missionary efforts ought to be carried out. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. Whenever we're thinking about fulfilling the Great Commission, we need to come up with a plan, we need to have a strategy, we need to have a method or what have you. Paul had his own methods. He didn't want to build on another man's foundation. He wanted to go to new soil. He was constantly on the move. But isn't it interesting that on 2 occasions here, he had an idea of his own to go into a certain region to preach the gospel, but the Holy Spirit forbade it, would not allow it. Now the question is, did God not want the people of Asia to hear the gospel? Obviously that's not the reason. We don't really know the reason, other than this was not the time for Paul to go there. Paul needed to go elsewhere. Maybe someone else could come. Maybe some things needed to happen in Asia, Bithynia, before Paul could go there. Who knows? God would know. The point I think we should glean from this is that when we are, whatever it is we're doing, preaching the gospel in a location, or going into the mission field, or whether we're talking about someone we want to have a Bible study with, or some program of work that we want to initiate in the church. Sometimes, and I don't know about you, sometimes you're trying something because you think this is the thing to do, and you're frustrated because it just doesn't seem to materialize. It doesn't come together. You pray about it, you work toward it, but it just doesn't get off the ground. You're wondering what's going on. Now, I'm going to say more about this in a moment. I'm not of the school of thought that says God speaks audibly to us. I do believe that God spoke audibly to the apostles. I do believe he directly communicated with them. Paul made that claim. The other apostles made that claim. We see evidence of that in the New Testament. I don't believe that God has ever spoken directly to me outside of his word. So the question I have to raise is, if God's still working with me as he did with Paul, or with you as he did with Paul and Silas, how does he do that? And I would answer that providential. Sometimes doors are shut to us that we thought should be open to us, but they're not. So rather than be frustrated and upset and assuming that we're not getting the job done, let's just move to the next field of opportunity. That's what Paul did. When the Lord said, no, you're not going here, walk out with it. No, you're not going there either. And so then God allowed him to see a vision. It's like, okay, you're not getting the point, Paul, so let me just kind of nudge you in the right direction. And so Paul is now going to Europe for the first time to carry the gospel. So we're going and expanding the field of work a little further than we've been before. Now, why God had chosen at this time to do that, only he could answer that question. He had his reasons, but it's important to note that in the work of evangelism, which is our primary task, when you think about why we're here, what are we doing at VBS? We're trying to evangelize young hearts and minds, but older hearts and minds as well. But it's all a part of the overall mission of the church. Preach the gospel to every creature which is under heaven. And that's what Paul was doing. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. And again, I'm just simply saying sometimes we're frustrated because we think things just aren't working out. Maybe rather than give up, I'm saying, let's just keep plugging along until we find that field of work that God has in store for us. Now, in 1 Corinthians 3, verse 9, and that verse is kind kind of a summary of what Paul had just said to the Corinthians. He said, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. But then he said in verse 9, we are God's fellow workers. So when Paul and Silas were going into the mission field, they weren't going alone. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew 28, and lo, I'm with you always, what? Even to the end of the age. So when he said, go and teach all nations, I'm going to go with you. I'm not going to let you go by yourself. I'm going to be a part of this. I don't know about you, I find that very humbling. And I find it very comforting. And I find it very challenging to consider that my God is working with me. And he's working with us. And if we can think about it in those terms, I believe it puts us in a whole different state of mind as far as the urgency of evangelism and the need for evangelism and the great privilege of evangelism. In Acts 18, verse 5, another example of what I'm saying, kind of going forward a little bit. But when Silas and Timothy had come from Macedonia, Paul, compelled by the Spirit, testified to the Jews that Jesus is the Christ. But when they opposed him and blasphemed, he shook his garments. And he said to them, your blood be upon your own heads. I'm clean from now on. I will go to the Gentiles. Now, what Paul is just saying here, he's expressing frustration. I'm not going to beat my head against the wall anymore. I'm tired of doing this. So I'm going to go to a different field of work. I'm going to go to the Gentiles. That was Paul's mindset. And so he departed from there, entered into the house of a certain man named Justus, one who worshiped God, whose house was next door to the synagogue. Then Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord with all his household. And many of the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized. Now, the Lord spoke to Paul in the night by a vision. Do not be afraid, but speak, and do not keep silent, for I am with you, and no one will attack you to hurt you, for I have many people in this city. Now, if you listen to Paul, he's at his ropes end. I'm tired of this. I'm going to move on. I'm not getting anywhere. And the Lord said, hang on. I need you to stay here because there are others that are receptive. See, the Lord knows what we don't know. He's able to see into the hearts of our fellow man. And so God is able to open those doors for us that need to be opened. We can continue on this. I will say this in closing on this thought. Jesus said to his apostles in John 4, lift up your eye and look on the field, for they're white already to harvest. We have to lift up our eyes. We have to continually look for those doors of opportunity. We can't just say, well, I tried it before it didn't work, so I'm going to quit. The point I'm making is we try and we keep trying until we find where we're effective. So we can yield that 30 or 60 or 100-fold because that's what God expects from us. Okay, any thoughts or comments on that?
Just that where he says the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized, it doesn't say they believed and were saved.
It doesn't say they were believed and saved. It said they heard, they believed, and they were baptized. Kind of sounds like Mark 16. He that believes and is baptized, believes what? What the gospel they just preached. So they have to hear the gospel, they believe it, and they're baptized. Same thing in 1 Corinthians, or rather Acts 18, about the Corinthians, I should say. So, good point. Okay, let's continue. Verse 11. Therefore, sailing from Troy, we ran a straight course, by the way. If you're going to run a straight course on the sea in a sailboat, probably because you have the winds working with you and the waves working with you. Okay, so if you're going to sail and you're going to go and you're going to get there quickly, it would be nice if Providence would work with you and give you the weather needed to make a quick journey. Wouldn't you think that would be the case? Isn't it interesting that they came with a straight course to Samothrace and the next day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is the foremost city on that part of Macedonia, a colony. And we were staying in that city for some days. And on the Sabbath day, we went out of the city to the riverside where prayer was customarily made, and we sat down and spoke to the women who met there. Now, a certain woman named Lydia heard us. She was a seller of purple from the city of Thyatira who worshiped God. The Lord opened her heart to heed the things spoken by Paul. And when she and her household were baptized, she begged us, saying, if you judge me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. So she persuaded us. Quickly, I want to make an observation or two about this woman, the first fruits at Philippi. Paul is here with Silas at the riverside because there were not enough Jews in this Roman colony to establish a synagogue. There had to be at least 12 males in a given location in order to justify building a synagogue. Obviously, there were not 12 males. So it was customary in situations like that to gather at a riverside. Why they chose rivers, I don't know. I'm just telling you what Jewish tradition said. That's what they would do. And so Paul naturally would know this. He went there and found these women, and they were worshiping because they had no synagogue to attend. So they're worshiping God, and so Paul preaches to them. By the way, I named my daughter after this very woman. And the reason I named her after this very woman is because she had a receptive heart. And it's interesting because the text says that the Lord opened her heart. Now, I don't want to get sidetracked on Calvinism. We'll be here all night if I do. Okay, but I just want to make this observation. Number one, Peter said to Cornelius, God is what? No respecter of what? Okay. God's not going to choose you over you. Or me over somebody else. Arbitrarily. So when the text says that God opened her heart, why didn't he open everybody's heart? Why didn't everybody at Philippi just have their hearts open? Why didn't God do that? We need to think about this for a moment. I think sometimes, even among my own brethren, there's a hint of Calvinism that's kind of lurking in the background. And I've heard it said kind of like this, well, the Lord needs to help me understand this text. So we're reading a Bible text, and so we ask God, help me understand. There's nothing wrong with asking God to help. But the question is, what kind of help are you expecting? And I think sometimes we're thinking that God is just going to, like he did with the apostles, just directly speak to my mind, open my understanding directly. Well, if God does that, why does he let me understand it better than you? Or you understand it better than me? If that's how God's working. That again puts God in the position of saying, I respect this person over you. I don't believe that God works that way. But now, if God's going to open my heart, it means, as Herman was saying Sunday night, that there are good and honest hearts out there. And so we sow the seed, and that seed is then planted in that good and honest heart. That's how that heart is opened. And it's opened through the Word. Notice what the text says. The Lord opened her heart so that she listened to the things that were spoken by Paul. What does Romans 10:17 say? Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. So how does God give us faith or increase our faith? Through His Word, right? Now when they heard this, they were pricked in their heart. Or when she heard this, the Lord opened her heart. God uses His Word, the Word spoken originally by the apostles, written down by those inspired men. It's the same Word that has the power to change our thoughts, our minds, our hearts, to open our hearts to be receptive to the gospel. But we have to make that choice for ourselves. God's not going to just do that to us. We have to make that choice. And then, of course, with the Word of God, we're successfully having our hearts open. And again, Donna, notice that she was baptized. Immediately after hearing and understanding, that's what she did. I told one of my inmates yesterday in that same conversation, because he asked me, and I've never had anyone ask me this question, ever, in all my years, and I've studied with a lot of people. But he apparently had been reading quite a bit, apparently from some Baptist scholar, but he asked me, he said, do you know Alexander Campbell? I said, no, I never met him. He lived a long time ago. He said, well, do you know of him? I said, well, yeah, I've heard of him. And I said, what do you know about him? He said, well, he said some of the same stuff you're saying. I said, well, I'm just quoting passages in the New Testament. That's all I was doing. I just quoted examples of converted to the New Testament. I didn't say anything. I just said, well, what about this one? What about that one? And I just kept saying the same. You sound like him. And I'm like, really? That's interesting. I said, well, where are you learning about this? And he cited the name. I don't recall ever hearing the name before. And I said, well, so he was promoting what he... No, he called him a water dog. I said, oh. I said, so that makes me a water dog, I guess. He said, no, I'm not going to say that, Officer Grace. Okay. I'm glad to hear you're not going to say that, but obviously that's who you're reading and that's who's influencing you. But I just found that fascinating. But I did make the point to him. I said, if you look at every account of conversion in the book of Acts, in every instance, baptism was an integral part of that conversion process. And yet it's the one thing that's most often minimized. In fact, utterly rejected in most cases today. That's tragic. We're going to say more again about that in a moment. Okay, verse 16, it happened as we went to prayer that a certain slave girl possessed with a spirit of divination met us, who brought her masters much profit by fortune telling. This girl followed Paul and us and cried out, saying, these men are the servants of the Most High God, who proclaim to us the way of salvation. And this she did for many days. Now let me ask you this question. Did this spirit of divination say anything that wasn't true? Did this spirit of divination speak the truth? Well, is it true that Paul and Silas were preaching from the Most High God and proclaiming the way of salvation? Yeah. And so why was Paul greatly annoyed? Verse 18. He turned and said to the Spirit, I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And he came out that very hour. Why was Paul annoyed? Why would he stop this divination spirit from falling around and proclaiming the truth about himself? Because he was a demon saying that. In the morning, I have to take out the courthouse detail, and there's this, how do I say this, radical left-leaning individual on the van when I go to the courthouse. He's an inmate. I mean, very radical. And I don't know where he got the idea that I'm not of his school of thought, but he realizes I'm not of his school of thought. And so every day he tries to poke and prod, and I chuckle and laugh. But he's trying to poke and prod because he thinks I'm conservative or something. And so he comes along with his liberal flapjack. But the other day, he said, Officer Gray, in all due respect, you are a racist. He said, well, I hadn't even said anything to the man. And I said, I'm not sure what you mean by that. He said, you are a Donald Trump supporter, aren't you? I said, I'm not going to answer that question. It's none of your business. I'm not going to discuss that with you. Well, I know you support Donald Trump. I said, well, what if I did? What is that to you? He said, well, then you're a racist. And I said, well, okay, what is about supporting our president that makes one a racist? He said that, was his name David Duke? Was that his name? A white supremacist. When Donald Trump was running for president, there was some media coverage about the fact that he too supported Donald Trump. And since he's a white supremacist, and since he supported Donald Trump, that means that Donald Trump is a racist. And if I, never having met David Duke, never spoken to the man, have no knowledge of the man, but since I also support our president because he wants to make America great again, if that be the case, then I'm a racist. So maybe that's what Paul was thinking. If we let Satan proclaim the truth about us, it's going to diminish the message. It's going to make me guilt by association. By the way, I'm not a racist, but I'm called a racist because apparently someone else who is a racist supports someone that they think I support, and I'm not even confirmed one way or the other whether I support him or not. But that's his assumption because he's a radical and he's kind of funny to listen to. I wish you could meet him sometime. It's kind of hilarious, but I don't have to put up with him for about 15 minutes and he gets off the van, and that's good for me, I suppose. But yeah, I'm a racist because someone else who is a racist supports someone that he thinks I support. Anyway, Paul is certainly annoyed, and he told the Spirit to come out, and this was not a good thing, and Paul didn't want to do this. And the reason I say he didn't want to do this is because he knew what was going to happen. He knew there would be blowback, because this woman is making money for her master. And the last thing you want to do is affect somebody's pocketbook. And everywhere Paul went, when the crowd were really enraged, mostly because their way of life was being threatened. Their monetary existence was under threat, and so that's the main reason they came after him. And he was, I'm no doubt, aware of this. So he put it off as long as he could. Finally just said, got to come out of her, and the demon came out. And the woman was apparently in her right mind from that time forward. Now, she was stating the truth. Not the only one who had a demon that stated the truth. Matthew 8:28. There were those in the lifetime of Jesus when he had come to the other side of the country, the Gadarene. There met him 2 demon-possessed men coming out of the tomb, exceedingly fierce, so that no one could pass that way. And suddenly they cried out, saying, "What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before our time?" So again, these demons are stating the truth, but Jesus, of course, was not going to allow them to publicize for him either. Anyway, it didn't go well with Paul, so he cast the demon out. In verse 19, when our master saw that their hope for profit was gone, they seized Paul and Silas, dragged them to the marketplace to the authorities, brought them to the magistrates, and said, "These men, being Jews, exceedingly trouble our city, and they teach customs which are not lawful for us, being Romans, to receive or observe." The multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates tore off their clothes and commanded them to be beaten with rods. And when they had laid many stripes on them, they threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to keep them securely. Having received such a charge, he put them into the inner prison and fastened their feet in stocks. Isn't that it? This is a pagan colony. Idolatry reigns supreme. All sorts of gods are worshipped. This is a multicultural city. Unless someone comes along and says there's only one God, and then suddenly you're not part of our group. I don't know about you, I find this eerily familiar today. And this mob that comes against these gospel preachers sounds very much like the mob we see gathering today. All claiming to be tolerant and all claiming to be multicultural. It's just not you Christian and not that Christian message and not that gospel message. We don't want that. That's not lawful for us to hear. We're not going to live by that. We're not going to accept or embrace that. And so we're going to be punished and really run out of the public square, and that's literally what's happening. By those who are proclaiming tolerance. They are the most intolerant people the world perhaps ever produced. Although I will say this, it's not the first time this has happened. What we're seeing today is simply a repeat of what has gone on in pagan cultures from time immemorial. I suppose it's always been this way. And so they beat these men. Now the thing about beating these men, there was no trial, there were no real accusations, there was no trial at all. It was just, we're going to beat you because we don't like you. And you're making us mad because you cost us some money. They threw them into prison. At midnight, however, verse 25, Paul and Silas were praying, singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were open and everyone's chains were loose. The keeper of the prison awakened from sleep, and seeing the prison doors open, supposing the prisoners had fled, drew his sword and was about to kill himself. Paul called with a loud voice, saying, "Do yourself no harm, we are all here." He called for a light, ran in, fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. He brought them out and said, "Sir, what must I do to be saved?" So they said, "Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you will be saved, you and your household." Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. And he took them the same hour of the night and washed their stripes. And immediately he and all his family were baptized. Now when he brought them into his house, he set food before them, and he rejoiced, having believed in God with all his household. Let me ask you this. If you were beaten, now I discussed this a few weeks ago, and I had some eyebrows raised. Y'all even stayed awake for that discussion. I remember it was a Wednesday night, and we were talking about, really, they were staying awake for that. But it was a Wednesday night, and we were talking about corporal punishment and capital punishment, that kind of thing. And I was advocating beating people in the public square. Better than imprisoning them for years. If they're selling drugs, tie them up to the pole in the town square and beat them. And the reason I'm saying that is because it's humiliating. It's humiliating to be beaten. And it hurts. And you're probably not going to do that again. But when it's over, you go home. Your feelings are hurt. You're embarrassed. But you go home and hopefully get your life together. Rather than sitting in prison on the tax dole for years, having crazy people like me yell at you all day. I mean, it's just better, in my opinion. That was the case, had been the case until we got to be so touchy-feely we can't do anything anymore. Can't even kill mosquitoes. I mean, it's crazy. It's mosquitoes lives matter too, I guess. So we have to be careful about that. That's just the world we live in, I suppose. But he was beaten. Now, I don't know about you, but that would hurt. In fact, his wounds need to be addressed. They needed to be cleaned. He was wounded. And yet, what is he doing at midnight? Singing and praying. You ever feel like the world's not fair? Like the world's doing things to you and you don't deserve it? I mean, why is this happening to me? How do you respond to that?
Prayer.
Well,
Prayer.
prayer? That's exactly right. You know, it's interesting because Paul's at Philippi. He's just been beaten unjustly without even having a trial. And he's a Roman citizen. That was illegal. And so now he's in prison. It's midnight. He's got his feet and legs, his arms and legs, rather, are in the stocks. He can't move. How do you pick your nose? I mean, what are you going to do at midnight when you can't sleep? I mean, you can't turn over. Your back's killing you. That would be miserable. He's in a dungeon. And so what does he do? He sings and he prays. Or maybe as Brother Jackson suggested. He was praying, which allowed him to sing. Because who sings? James tells us, the one that's married. Well, what makes you married? A peaceful heart. A tranquil, peaceful heart. What gives you peace and tranquility? Prayer. How do we know this? Paul would later write the church at Philippi that he's here established. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. He was at peace because he was in prayer and he was able to sing. But in singing, the others are hearing him. And I'm sure the jailer was hearing him. The jailer probably heard what the spirit of divination was saying. Probably widely known what he's there to do and what he's there preaching. The jailer was aware of this, but he didn't know the particulars of the gospel. He just knew they're preaching the way of salvation. And so when he springs in, the first thing he asks, what must I do to be saved? You know, someone suggested me years ago, I'm not going to say who because my daddy knows him really well, but he told me one time, he said, I don't believe he was seeking salvation from his sins. I think he meant, how can you keep it from getting killed by my superiors? There's so much in the context it just doesn't lend itself to that. I don't know where that idea came from, because everything in the context of chapter 16 suggests he's asking the very question that he seemed to be asking. He was asking, what must I do to be saved eternally? He was wanting that. Because the prisoners were all there, he had no reason to kill himself or to fear being killed because the prisoners were intact. So that wasn't even a question any longer. But he's asking, after learning that, what must I do to be saved? And so Paul says, believe on the Lord with all your house and you will. Now, the same inmate I was talking to yesterday argued that Romans 10, 9, and 10 says all you got to do is believe and confess and you'll be saved. And here Paul seems to say, just believe on the Lord. Let me ask you this question. What about the Lord did this jailer potentially know? I don't know. A few things maybe. And know what they were singing about. What were they singing? Christ, my Redeemer? Maybe. I mean, what were they singing? What was heard? And what was this man, what was his level of knowledge? I don't know. I do know this, that when he said believe on the Lord, he didn't mean only. He didn't say just believe in the Lord and don't worry about doing anything. He didn't say that. He said believe on the Lord. In other words, here's this pagan, doesn't know what else to do. So he's telling this man who knows nothing else, believe on the Lord. That's where it starts. But he didn't even know what about the Lord to believe, or who is the Lord that I should believe on him. So Paul teaches him the word of the Lord. That's the very next verse. And so he learned the word of the Lord. Now what's interesting to note is upon learning the word of the Lord, the same hour of the night, what does he do? Well, he showed a penitent spirit by washing the stripes of the men. He probably beat himself earlier that day. He's washing their stripes. That shows a penitent state of mind. But he's not just washing their stripes. He himself is being baptized with his household immediately. They didn't wait. They weren't going to say, well, wait till next Sunday or when we can fill the baptistry. that night, they found the means for him and his household to be baptized. And there's a lot to be said about that. Brother,
Yeah, Acts chapter 8, when Philip encountered the Ethiopian eunuch, Philip says he began at the same scripture teaching him about Jesus.
exactly.
Same thing here.
That's exactly right. He began at that scripture and taught him Christ, and the same result. And as they came upon a certain water, he said, here's water. And what had he been taught? Christ. And upon hearing Christ taught from Isaiah 53, he saw the water connection. And he said, what's hindering me from being baptized? Same thing in every case of conversion in the book of Acts. We can continue repeating this on and on. We talked about that last night. But again, very good point. Taught him the Lord, taught him about the Lord. Now, yes?
I think an inspired commentary on verse 34, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
He believed in the Lord with all of his house.
Yes. Having believed in God with all of God.
Verse 31 says, believe on the Lord, doesn't tell us how. Verse 34 says, between the two verses, is Paul hardly to say the rest of the story.
That's right.
That's what it would involve in believing on the Lord, because verse 34 says, after repented and was baptized, he rejoiced, having believed on the Lord. Verse 31 and verse 34 should be taken together.
That's a good point.
And verse 34 is a commentary on verse 31.
I was gonna think about that one day, but I'm glad you beat me to it and sped it up for me. That's a really good point. Verse 31, they are together, the companion. And what goes on between them is an explanation of what it means to believe on the Lord in this instance. He's being baptized. Yes.
Yes, the first one says believe, and 34 says believe
Having
as
believed.
having been enacted.
Having believed. But what had he just done? He had just been baptized, which is integral to faith. You must, faith moves you. He that believes and is baptized, shall we say. Now, before we run out of time, which I think we're already, I don't know what time we're supposed to stop.
7:30.
I just got started, do I? Oh, okay, good. The doctrine of faith only is pervasive. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, where does it come from? Because the only time faith only is mentioned in the Bible is in James 2. And it says there, we're not justified by faith alone. The only time it's ever mentioned. So where did this idea come from? How did it get so widespread? I want to take a moment, and I'm not going to give you a long history lesson, but just kind of touch on some highlights here. If you go back to the Middle Ages, there was a doctrine that was being taught in the Catholic Church. A place called purgatory. What's purgatory? Does anybody know what purgatory is from a Catholic perspective? Yes.
It's a made-up place where you punish for a while but get to go to heaven anyhow.
Okay, you said a made-up place. Well, all right, that's kind of a change. But it's a Catholic doctrine. Not a biblical doctrine, a Catholic doctrine. And it was preached, far and wide in Europe, in the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. And the idea was, you kind of, when you died, you didn't die perfect. Everybody was not perfect. And so you would not go straight to heaven because you weren't that good a person. And depending on how bad a person or how not good a person you were, you would stay that long in purgatory, and you'd have to bust rocks and get burned for a while and get beat by the devil. And I don't know what all happened, but it was not a pleasant experience. But you stayed there until your sentence was over, until you were able to be paroled and you could go to heaven. Okay, that's the general idea. Completely dreamed up by the Catholic Church. But it was so widespread and no one questioned it because no one could read the Bible because it wasn't written in their language. And only the priests knew it and only a few of them knew it. And so people were being lied to, didn't know any better. So they bought into this stuff. Now, if you take this doctrine of purgatory and you tell a young man, 16, 17 years old, sometimes 12 or 13 years old, your mom and dad that died from the plague last year or 6 months ago, they're probably in purgatory, screaming and writhing in pain right now, and you don't want them to suffer that. So we have a solution for you. You can get your parents out of purgatory a lot quicker if you're going on a crusade. And so we're going to give you a weapon, we're going to get you a horse, and we're going to send you to fight the infidels, the Muslims over there in Jerusalem, And we're going to take back the holy city and the holy sites, and so we're going to do that. And so that's what you can do for penance. Penance is what is required. You got to pay, buddy, and you can do it. You can do it for someone else, on someone else's behalf. Well, a lot of people were not willing to send their young men to the crusades. A lot of young men were not able to go to the crusades because they grow crops, because they had to survive. They had to make a living. And people were literally dying right and left from the plague. And so the population was hurting. So where are you going to find this army to send to fight the infidel? Well, the Catholic Church was in a dilemma. We need people to fight the infidel, but we also need to build St. Peter's Basilica. We need to raise money. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start selling indulgences. It's a piece of paper with a papal seal on it. And this indulgence is, depending on how much you pay, it is to pay for sin. I'm not making that up. Literally, pay for sin. I knew a woman that I baptized here in the Catholic Church that divorced in the late 1960s, and she paid her penance, and the Catholic Church gave her leave then because she paid her penance. She paid her indulgence, rather. She paid her indulgence. And that's what they called it. And she was allowed then to marry again because she paid her indulgence. That was in my lifetime. I don't know if they're still doing that or not. They're now shaking hands with Muslims. I don't know what's going on in the Catholic Church there. It's just, I don't even know. But I'm saying historically what happened. And so here it is. These men are going off to war, but they can't do that. So instead of going to war, just pay it. So if you pay enough money, you get mom and daddy out of purgatory. And guess what? If you don't want to go to purgatory, you can go live any way you want to. Just make sure you pay enough. Just pay up. Pay the church. Pay your dues. And that's what they did. A man by the name of Tetzel, remember I shared this with the class once before. This is a true story. When Martin Luther came along, this is what enraged Martin Luther so much. A man by the name of Tetzel was selling indulgences all over for the Catholic Church. And he came to a certain village and he was preaching. The minute the coin hits the coffer, a soul flies from purgatory. And people were hearing that. They're like, oh, that's cool, so they're giving him money. Well, some man raised his hand. He said, I want to know, is it possible to be forgiven for future sins? Sins I haven't committed yet. Well, yes, my son, of course. You want to commit future sins, you can commit those, but you got to pay the money, okay? So he paid the money and he got the papal indulgence with the papal seal on it. And so when the man finished his work in town, got on his donkey to leave town with all of the money that he collected, he left town, and when he got to the outskirts of town, this man beat him up, robbed him, and so Tetzel wanted to bring charges against him, and did. Wanted to have him tried. He held up his indulgence. I was forgiven for this. And so he kept the money, and of course it made the point. And here's what I'm trying to get to. By the time Martin Luther came on the scene, the idea of buying your way to heaven was common. Literally paying your way to heaven. This is the 16th century. And so Martin Luther was like, that's not right. And, saying so many Hail Marys and doing penance and all the stuff that they had just concocted through the years. You do this and you can have that. And, you're working your way, to salvation. And Martin Luther's like, that just can't be. So what did he do? He took that pendulum, that theological pendulum that's way over here, and he swings it to the other side, and he says, I don't think James is even a book of the Bible. We should probably put it in the back because it's questionable. And I believe that I'm going to misinterpret what Paul said in Romans, and I'm going to make this case that we're justified by faith alone. That was Martin Luther's view. And unfortunately, that is now the common view. We're saved by faith alone. By the way, in John chapter 12, verse 42, many of the Pharisees and the chief priests and rulers believed on Jesus, but they wouldn't confess him lest they be cast out of the synagogue. Now, were they justified in the sight of God because they loved the praise of men more than God? Well, they believed on him. They believed him, but they wouldn't confess him. Now, you know the answer to that question. Faith alone simply does not merit or meet the qualifications for God's requirement for salvation. He that believes and is baptized shall be saved. Philippian jailer certainly teaches this. I'm going to take 31 and 34 tonight and memorize that. That's a good point. I'll probably wind up using that tomorrow, I'm sure, in our next discussion. But anyway, any questions or comments about the conversion? Yes?
Well, yeah, earlier
killed by association?
Nobody's pointing the finger at him or them, but yet he was the grand clan master or
Yeah.
whatever in West Virginia.
But he's on the right theological,
Yeah.
ideological spectrum, so he can be that, and it's okay. It's just, if you have conservative ideas, then you're evil, even if you've done nothing wrong. It's just, that's just the way of the world, and that's what these people were saying at Philippi. These Jews, that's racism, by the way. These Jews are here preaching customs and all law for us Romans to imbibe or accept. Well, they were preaching one Lord, and it was true that the state did demand allegiance to Caesar in a sense of recognizing him as God. It wasn't full blown yet, but it was already in the works. So they might have been arguing, to be a good Roman, we can't accept what they're saying.
But do we have to be Jews first
Yeah.
before we can be Christians?
Yeah, no, that was what they were struggling with, at least in Acts 15. Anyway, yes.
I like to liken it to the same snake that told Adam and Eve, you won't die if you eat of this tree, is telling the world now, skip baptism.
That's right.
You know, Jesus said that a long time ago, but it is still true, and we're still held to it, just like, I don't know how long Adam and Eve were in that garden and eating of them trees after they had been told, don't eat of this tree, but when they ate of that tree, out they went.
That's right.
So it's just as serious business today as it was
Absolutely.
back then.
Absolutely. No matter how long ago he said it, and we're obligated to do it. Don't want a cookie? I think they got a cookie next door. You can have two. You can have two. Hey, this is a grand finale. Yeah, you can get a lot. Thank you all.